Hi, my name is Mina Le. If you are not new here, if you're a returning viewer, you'll notice my background is a little bit different. I am actually staying at my friend Tessa of Modern Girls. I'm staying at her apartment right now. I am just passing through on the way to Japan, but I thought I would say hi to her because I haven't seen her in a while. And because the work doesn't stop, I'm here recording. Today, I want to dig my talons into the dark romance book genre and why it's so appealing to women especially, and whether or not we should care about it. I'm going to be looking at Twilight fanfiction, and also that one Atlantic article that says college students can't read anymore. I've been thinking about this topic since I first wrote my rom-com video, which if you haven't watched it, you should, if only for my editor Charlie's amazing montage at the beginning of the video. But at the end of that video, I mentioned the romance movies that had recently come out were mostly based on books. And I did mention It Ends With Us, originally written by Colleen Hoover. And at the time that I wrote that essay, the It Ends With Us movie adaptation was just picking up steam in the discourse. The negative reviews were just rolling out and people were starting to turn on Blake Lively, especially with the flippant way that she handled marketing a movie about domestic abuse.
It Ends With Us is in theaters now, so grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
I have not read or watched It Ends With Us, but I got the gist from reading reviews that it's basically about a woman who marries an abusive man and in the end, after birthing their child, finally leaves him to protect their daughter. This is unsurprising. Hoover's novels in general tend to probe dark themes. And even though I'd say a story about abuse is not revelatory on its own, unlike some other writers who may have a bit more finesse with the subject, the polarizing detail about Miss Hoover is that she writes about these themes in a very breezy, romantic way. The Colleen Hoover lovers generally are drawn to this style. In their eyes, her writing is straightforward, it's easy to understand, while the plots are intense and keep the reader captivated, as well as raise awareness about serious issues. However, her detractors think she's morally irresponsible for writing about dark subject matter so lightly, on top of just being a bad writer. For example, this section from her book Ugly Love is made fun of all the time. I'll read it for you guys. "Thank you for this baby," she says from the back seat. "He is beautiful." I laugh. "You're responsible for the beautiful part, Rachel. The only thing he got from me was his balls." She laughs. She laughs hard. "Oh my God, I know," she says. "They're so big." We both laugh at our son's big balls. Important context. The young parents that are speaking in this passage are actually step-siblings. Yeah, not the context I'm sure you wanted to hear about.
Okay, let's move on.
Every holiday season, I try to be more intentional with the kinds of gifts I buy, but also where I buy them from, which is why I'm excited to work with ThredUp this year. ThredUp is an online thrift and secondhand marketplace, and I'll show you some of the pieces that I bought to gift to my loved ones. The first thing that I bought was this pair of Gucci sunglasses for my mom. She loves big framed sunglasses, and these were listed in excellent condition. In general, I think you can find so many amazing products secondhand, and the holiday season produces so much overconsumption and waste, so I try to find secondhand gifts as often as possible. The second thing I bought was this Burberry sweater for my grandma. Elevated basics are one of the best gifts for anyone because everyone needs basics in their closet, but few people are willing to splurge on themselves for a high quality basic. I was able to find this Burberry sweater at an 84% discount with minimal wear, and I think my grandma will love it for the East Coast winter especially. The last thing I got was this Eckhouse Lotta knit turtleneck sweater that was actually new with tags. You can toggle the search results to only show you items with their tags still on ThredUp. These items are typically in excellent or unworn condition, which makes them such a cost-effective gift option. This top was actually 80% off retail, and I'm gifting it to one of my best friends because she loves this brand, and once again, it's an elevated basic. ThredUp has a new improved search engine that makes finding unique gifts easy. You can plug in exact items like moto boots or even something vague like gothic dress, and ThredUp will pull up the best items that match your needs. Looking for stellar gifts at wallet-friendly prices? It's always a win-win when you give the gift of thrift with ThredUp. Shop my gift picks using the link below and use code MINALE for 45% off plus free shipping on your first order. Constance Grady writes for Vox that it's a taboo plot twist that never pays off into any major revelations or insight into their characters. And then right after the parents exchange this weird joke, they get into a car crash and the baby dies. Transparently, I am a Colleen Hoover detractor, not only because I don't like her writing style, but also because her behavior outside of just writing books indicates to me that she doesn't actually care that much about the themes that she writes about. For example, when asked to include trigger warnings in her books, Colleen Hoover refused. She said in a now deleted blog post from 2016, "I've received quite a number of negative reviews in relation to the lack of a trigger warning for the subject matter, and for writing about such unhappy things. As a fellow reader with my fair share of past experiences, I understand that there are issues some people do not want to read about. But as a writer, there are many things I don't want revealed in the blurbs of my books." I know trigger warnings are not a common practice in traditional publishing, though I think it's becoming more standard for dark romance fiction. And considering the fact that Hoover's literally cashing in on nail polish collabs for her more serious books, and the fact that her books are often marketed in the general romance section of bookstores, I feel like she should be aware that there will be new readers purchasing these books with the expectation that they're just like cutesy stories. It's totally different from like when a reader purchases a book from the horror section. But even then, like, my opinion on trigger warnings is that it's probably just better to include them. So if your audience, like your readership is asking for them, then what's the harm? Like, the only people I know who actually go through trigger warnings in books are people who have triggers. Everyone else who doesn't want any spoilers, as she claims they are, they can just skip over the page. It's not that distracting. Also, when I went to see Zoe Kravitz's Blink Twice in the movie theater, they gave a very vague trigger warning at the beginning, and in retrospect, I actually think that was a good choice. The sexually violent scenes were incredibly visceral, and I think if the warning wasn't there, those scenes might be too shocking, and people would then lose like the narrative thread of the film, which actually ends up hurting the artistic integrity of the movie. Anyways, this is a long-winded introduction for today's topic, which is the dark romance genre. Dark romance is a subgenre of romance, except with dark themes, hence the name. Dark themes include subjects like abuse, murder, and violence. Like most genres, it's mainly a marketing designation, and some of the things that I talk about today are not going to be explicitly labeled as dark romance, though they carry tropes that are popular in dark romance works.
It turns out that teens all across America are biting one another because of this whole vampire craze.
Biting is a way to show affection towards the other person and to just get a crazy adrenaline rush.
While stories of evil husbands, domestic violence, and adultery have been commonplace throughout history, most people can agree that the origins of today's dark romance subgenre are rooted in the bodice ripper subgenre of the 1970s and 80s. The term bodice ripper was first used in 1978, and the subgenre depicts a historical or gothic romance, typically featuring scenes in which the heroine is subjected to violence. If you've seen those covers where a woman is in a historically inaccurate garment and she's being held by a muscular man in a sensual pose, 9 times out of 10, that's a bodice ripper. As a late 90s baby, my personal foray into dark romance was, of course, the very prestigious work of the Twilight Saga by Stephenie Meyer. A series of 4 books, with the first being published in 2005, the Twilight Saga centers the relationship between depressed 17-year-old Bella Swan and eternal 18-year-old Edward Cullen, who is also an angsty, mind-reading vampire. Swoon. The series was adapted into a movie series, with the first Twilight movie releasing in 2008, further spawning a massive fan base made up of mostly teenage girls.
It's such a good relationship that they have. Edward's very much of a protector of her.
The books are technically categorized as YA or young adult fiction and are not exactly raunchy in comparison to like actual dark romance books out there. The only sex scene is in the 4th book, Breaking Dawn, and there's like a fade to black transition. So I would say that Twilight is like dark romance light. For context, I read the series when I was 11, and among PTA mothers, there was already a rumbling over what the book series could do to the minds of their impressionable daughters. My mom actually told me I wasn't allowed to read it, but I would borrow each book from a friend from school, remove the book jacket, hide it in the crevice between my bed and the wall, and spend many nights just reading the book secretly and depriving myself of sleep. Also, my mom watches my videos, so I'm sorry to have to tell you this happened, Mom, but I think I turned out pretty okay. Despite its relative tameness, the series does still share tropes common in dark romance fiction. One of the major criticisms levied against the Twilight series was actually that it romanticized abuse. Throughout the series, Edward experiences aggressive mood swings, exhibits intense jealousy and controlling behavior, is demanding, and physically intimidates Bella. He also stalks Bella for a good portion of the first book, frequently derides her for her humanness, calling her an insignificant little girl, a little coward, and an idiot in the first book, and laughs at her often, which comes across even worse considering her low self-esteem. As an example of his abusive behavior, I'll read a scene from Twilight in which Edward grabs hold of Bella's jacket, ignores her pleas for him to let go, and then drags her across the school parking lot to his car. Stephanie Meyer writes on page 89, Edward was towing me towards his car now, pulling me by my jacket. It was all I could do to keep from falling backward. He'd probably just drag me along anyway if I did. Let go, I insisted. He ignored me. I staggered along sideways across the wet sidewalk until we reached the Volvo. Then he finally freed me. I stumbled across the passenger door. I was mentally calculating my chances of reaching the truck before he could catch me. I had to admit they weren't good. I'll just drag you back, he threatened, guessing my plan. In another car-related instance, in the third book, Eclipse, Edward removes the engine from Bella's car so that she has to stay at home and can't go and meet her friend and rival love interest, Jacob. At the time that I read that, though, I was like, this is the most romantic behavior I've ever heard of in my life. Needless to say, for years following the success of Twilight, Stephanie Meyer was accused of crafting a problematic story, one that specifically came about not just with the gender dynamic, but also with the built-in power differential that a vampire has over a human.
In Stephanie Meyer's twisted fantasy, she's a reckless, ruin-everything damsel in distress that just needs a man to save her over and over and over again.
So for Twilight's 10-year anniversary, she published a gender-swap version of the first book titled Life and Death. I think the title is just so silly. Okay, to prove that there was nothing uncouth about the relationship, and also to, let's be real, get more money, Edward is now Edith in this book, and Bella is now Beau. In the book's foreword, Meyer maintains that it would have made no difference if the humans were male and the vampire were female, and it's still the same story. What's funny is that Meyer actually changed a lot of the story to make the relationship seem more equitable. Heather Brown wrote a really good analysis on the differences between the two books. She writes, where Edward is outraged, Edith is surprised. And when Edward is indignant, Edith smiles. Moreover, in Twilight, the text shows that Edward ignored Bella and threatened her. These are absent from the same scene in Life and Death. Elsewhere, Meyer has deleted abusive words or looks in Life and Death that are psychologically intimidating. Some examples include removing the menace from Edward's looks and voice. His voice was low and dark, to her voice was low. So maybe Meyer was aware of the abusive undertones of her original book, but just didn't want to admit it. In the Twilight Saga's defense, though, one of the reasons that so many girls loved it, including myself, was because it centered a female protagonist who was transitioning into adulthood. Prior to Twilight, there weren't really any culturally dominated female-centered stories beyond the scope of Disney princess movies, which don't deal with any sexual themes, complicated relationships, or mental health issues. Twilight was the first piece of media that I read with more mature themes, and I think it was actually quite formative for my experience growing up. Because it was such a cultural phenomenon, reading it gave me and other girls a jumping off point to talk about our own desires and fears. I can't say how this book might have negatively affected other young female readers, but for me, I think I was just at the right age, the right age of 11, where it would be a long time before I got into a relationship, and by that point, I was no longer looking for an Edward Cullen. My experience with the Twilight Saga was also very short and sweet. I didn't watch the movies after the first one because I didn't like the casting. A lot of people ragged on Kristen Stewart. I just want to say I wasn't one of them. I actually had beef with Robert Pattinson, who didn't live up to my Edward Cullen fantasy, especially with the 5-head revealing haircut. And he also, I remember he said in an interview that he'd never washed his hair, and I also thought that was gross.
This is what I am.
I was also never a Twilight fanfiction reader. I read fanfiction, but it just wasn't Twilight. I was sort of just over the whole shebang after I finished reading Breaking Dawn. But I know that Twilight fanfiction was a creative outlet for many fans. One of those fans was Snow Queen's Ice Dragon, author of the serial work Master of the Universe. When it was still public on fanfiction.net in 2009, the description of the story read, Bella Swan is drafted in to interview the reclusive, enigmatic Edward Cullen, multimillionaire CEO of his company. It's an encounter that will change her life irrevocably, leading her to dark realms of desire. In 2011, Snow Queen's Ice Dragon, aka Erica Leonard and now Mitchell, would go on to change the names of the story, remove all its Twilight references, and publish it with independent Australian publisher Writer's Coffee Shop under the new title 50 Shades of Grey, and under the new pen name E.L. James. The success of this book and its 2 sequels would lead her to eventually become, in 2013, the highest paid author in the world. And you know what? I respect the hustle. 50 Shades is more explicitly rooted in the dark romance tradition. It follows a 21-year-old college senior, Anna Steele, who ends up getting swept into a BDSM relationship with wealthy entrepreneur Christian Grey. 50 Shades and its subsequent movie adaptation in 2015 launched a plethora of discourse similar to the type of commentary we see about Colleen Hoover novels today. And yes, James's actual writing was criticized too. Here's an out-of-context snippet. My medulla oblongata has neglected to fire any synapses to make me breathe. Actually, I don't even know what context would make that sound any better. I also remember there was a lot of hoopla over the tampon scene that they ended up cutting out from the movie. It's where Christian erotically removes Anna's tampon. You know, every woman's dream. But considering that 50 Shades derived from a fan fiction work, I'm not really surprised by its melodramatic nature. There was this whole trend on TikTok where people would make fun of the shameful kinds of things that they've read on AO3, which is a fan fiction platform.
Burn it.
What?
Did I say stand there and look stupid? No, I said burn it.
There's actually a whole category of fan fiction called dark fic, which just generally describes content where terrible or violent things happen to the characters. If you go on AO3, a lot of these works are tagged dead dove, do not eat, which refers to this Arrested Development scene.
No, I don't know what I expected.
In the context of fanfiction, it translates to, you are warned, so if you don't like these warnings, don't read. I read fanfiction when I was a teenager, and I think out of my own personal bias, I associate writing and reading it with being younger. Obviously, that's not true, and there are plenty of adults who engage with fanfiction, but I do think most people probably at least develop the taste for it starting from when they're younger. After all, the sign-up age for Wattpad is 13 years old. This is also a bit outdated, but I found a 2011 survey looking at demographics on another popular fanfiction website called fanfiction.net, and the results show that out of 6,410 members surveyed, 80% of them said they were between the ages of 13 and 17 years old, with the average age being 15 years old. And none of this is necessarily a bad thing. There are numerous studies on how fanfiction has led to positive literary analysis skills and stronger writing capabilities that can then be translated into reading and writing the more serious literary fiction, if need be. For example, in Amy Pollard's thesis on fanfiction as a subversive and dialogic literary art form, she explains how fanfiction can be linked to literary criticism because fanfiction authors analyze characters, construct explanations of fictional universes, and share their ideas about and interpretations of a story, often through dialogue with other fans. Also, honestly, when I was in high school, I didn't really read that much for fun. Most of my reading time was consumed by the required books that we had to read for school, which I never liked. And honestly, I spark noted most of them. Sorry. I just cannot physically make myself read something that I'm not interested in, especially at that age when I was I'd rather be on Tumblr. But I did read a lot of fan fiction at that time. And I think that was my reading for fun, you know? And it did allow me to develop a lot of critical thinking skills and literary analysis skills outside of just the normal stuff that you learn in high school. English professor Francesca Coppa also spoke in a roundtable on fanfiction about how stories like Twilight survive the proverbial test of time, not simply because of their aesthetic qualities or the relevance of their themes, but because they are at the center of an effective network or a fandom. And she points to theater scholars as being the first to do this. Quote, if a play is not picked up by directors who want to produce it, that is to say, reproduce it, then it's a dead thing, a museum piece. I think because there's also no editorial board, publishing company, or monetization tied to fanfiction writing, it's given writers more creative freedom in what kinds of tropes and themes they want to explore. And as fanfiction has gotten more popular through social media, it's generated familiarity and or higher tolerance for certain darker tropes and themes that used to only exist in niche internet communities. If you're really brave, you can go look up the Omegaverse. I really don't want to have to explain it. It's essentially this like dark sexual werewolf trope that originated in supernatural fan fiction, but has since inspired the creation of original published books like The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson, Not Many Options by Gillian West, and Allison Ames's Ruthless Warlord series. While I no doubt think that humans have always been drawn to dark subject matter, the horror and thriller genres are popular for a reason, I do wonder how many readers of dark romance started their journey first through fan fiction.
I'm going to write the most erotic, graphic, freakiest friend fiction ever.
All right, freaky friend fiction!
If you look on Reddit for dark romance book recommendations, you might be shocked.
Fire up the smut.
One user writes, I'm looking for romance that have more extreme bullying, harassment, graphic stuff. Not just 3 chapters of S harassment, only for an apology, and then the rest of the book is some loving romance. Another user wrote in asking for a book with crazy, deranged, insane, obsessed, evil, sadistic, twisted, powerful, manipulative, killer, bully, cruel, etc., male main character. The crazier the better. They're so interesting to read about, LOL. What's interesting is that in these spaces, it's so normalized to read books with dark content that none of the comments expressed any kind of horror or disgust with anyone posting these kinds of requests. But if you're not into reading these kinds of themes, you might be wondering why anyone would. Last year, Carter Sherman wrote about dark romance for Vice News and reported that many of the women she interviewed who read dark romance said that the genre was a form of escapism. Most dark romances actually do have a happy ending, which can then be interpreted into the message that no matter how bad a situation is, the main female character can still survive and fall in love. It's similar to women's fixation in the true crime genre. Criminologist Dr. Scott Bond told Psychology Today that the single female true crime fans he speaks to say that they believe consuming true crime media can help them detect red flags in the personalities and demeanors of men they go on dates with. This is not a dark romance novel recommendation, by the way, but I recently read Eliza Clark's novel Penance, which tells the story of 3 teenage girls who brutally murder another girl in their high school. It's inspired by 2 real-life murder cases, that of Shanda Scherer and that of Suzanne Capper, both in the 90s, though Clark decided to situate her story in the 2010s. Overall, I found the book to be a really interesting commentary on the true crime space. It's told through the POV of a fictional true crime journalist who was previously canceled for unethical practices. And overall, the book makes you question, what does everyone actually get out of true crime reporting? But my favorite part of the book was less on the heavy stuff and actually on how accurately Clark recreates the 2010s fandom space on Tumblr. One of the murderers, Dolly, is a groupie for these fictional Columbine-esque shooters named Maddie McKnight and Brian Cooper. And her Tumblr account is reminiscent of the kind of serial killer fangirls who would share things like thirst posts for the Boston bomber. One detail that I thought was interesting was the explanation behind Dolly's love for Maddie. Clark writes, Dolly's version of Maddie was ultimately a romanticized version of herself, the person she thought she was and whom she wished to be. Reading this bit actually reminded me of the amazing Twilight video that Natalie Wynn put out earlier this year. In her video, Natalie talks about how many women are drawn to serial killers because they are attracted to power. She quotes Rachel Monroe in her book Savage Appetites. In a world where masculinity meant power and power meant violence, some women would always opt to align themselves with that violence and exert their own perverse power through love. It was a way to feel special, chosen, but it was an ugly kind of special tainted with other people's pain. So very Lady Macbeth. I think everyone is attracted to power, not just women. Though historically, the avenue for women to gain power was through an advantageous marriage, and so it makes sense why a lot of women are attracted to powerful men in particular and having an actual relationship with them. However, I think there can be a problem with how we uphold and designate who has power through literature. One of dark romance's main criticisms is how much it centers whiteness. Media critic Fangirl Jean explains the implications of this. A white man can literally go as far as murder, and we still think of him as an appealing romantic partner, but a black guy just existing in the world next to you is scary. There's a truth being revealed about what we think is possibly romantic and safe and what we don't. In the case of the actual true crime fandom, paying unequal attention to white perpetrators can also bring to light which victims we consider worth caring about. As Dr. Bond says, the stereotype that all serial killers are young white males is simply not true, and it does an injustice to the minority victims of serial killers. If we don't pay attention to when young African American women are getting killed, it very much does an injustice to those victims and their families, and yet this is the case. But I want to go back to Natalie's video because later on she makes this poignant point. Natalie cites romance writer Laura Kinsale's essay, The Androgynous Reader. And in that essay, Kinsale argues that women identify themselves both as the hero and the heroine in these heterosexual romance stories. She says, "It is myopic to believe that just because the reader is female, she is confined to the heroine's character. The female reader is the hero and also is the heroine as object of the hero's interest." Now, this isn't a workshop theory, so hear me out. We love serious journalism on here, clearly. But on 2010's Tumblr, it was a common practice to Photoshop flower crowns onto just about everything, but was like especially popular to do so with like bad boy fictional characters. It was actually so popular in the Hannibal fandom that at the 2015 San Diego Comic-Con, series showrunner Brian Fuller, producer Martha De Laurentiis, and actors Hugh Dancy and Richard Armitage all donned flower crowns as fan service during the Hannibal panel. E.J. Nielsen and Lori Morimoto described the donning of flower crowns as tying into the larger movement of a feminized fandom, which describes fan communities that are made up of women and that center traditionally feminine interests. That includes practices like media collaborations with beauty companies and like closet cosplay. I feel like for women, the practice of feminizing these media objects is to make them more familiar to us. By making these fictional characters more feminine, in a way, it helps with this like self-identification, whether or not we realize it. Kinsale also clarifies in her essay that identifying with the hero doesn't actually mean secretly wishing to be a man, but instead doing so allows for women to lean into masculine parts of themselves, giving them a safe space to explore stereotypically masculine coded behaviors like anger and passion. And you know what? I'm not afraid to admit this because this is a safe space for me. When I was a teenager, I was very active on like role-playing forums, and looking back, I don't think I've ever role-played as a female character. I always picked a male character. And all the characters that I picked to roleplay were also characters that I was like also attracted to. And so I totally get what Kinsale is talking about, where you want to be both the hero and also the hero's love interest. So hard pivot. There was an Atlantic article that was going around a bit ago making people very angry, as the Atlantic tends to do. The article is called "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books," and in it, the writer Rose Horowitz explores the trend of students struggling with deep reading at elite universities. It raised a lot of moral panic over, once again, the usual suspect, TikTok-induced shortened attention spans, which I do think is somewhat based on truth, but I think that we get these kinds of articles like once every 6 months, and at this point, I'm tired of reading like the same thing over and over again. Also, if you read this article, I think you should read it in conjunction with Carrie Santo Thomas's essay, "The Atlantic Did Me Dirty." Santo Thomas was one of the interviewed teachers for the article, and she claims that Horowitz conveniently omitted all her counter-arguments. Again, I think that Horowitz has some truthful insights, but it's also nice to read Santo Thomas's essay for a more balanced take on the issue. The only reason I'm bringing this article up right now is because there's this one quote that just really annoyed me. The article mentions this anecdote from literature humanities professor Nicholas Dames, who has been teaching the subject at Columbia University since 1998. And he said that in the past, students would say their favorite books were books like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. And now he says almost half of them cite young adult books, namely Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson. I have no problem with what he said because it's just a fact based on his experience, but this quote was just like taken widely out of context all over my social media with people griping, "Oh my God, Percy Jackson is middle grade fiction. These college kids are so stupid now." In the defense of Percy Jackson enthusiasts, I just want to say that asking what's your favorite book is an entirely different question from what's the best book you've ever read. A favorite book is so personal and can be weighted by like nostalgia, comfort, the number of times you've reread it, and or how much you enjoy its universe. It also might simply be the book that made you love reading. Gen Z is also getting this reputation for being like the most nostalgic generation, so it makes sense why some of them might pick a book from their childhood as their favorite. It's like when Josh O'Connor said his favorite movie was Ratatouille, and of course, no one was like, "Oh, he must be so stupid about films," because we know he's actually been in a number of high art films. Watch La Chimera if you haven't, please. I swear he will come over to the light and become a Josh O'Connor stan like the rest of us big brain people if you watch it. But anyway, we know the context of Josh. We don't know the context of these students. And so it's easy to say they're stupid because it fits in the narrative that we've constructed in our heads that kids are worse these days than ever before. I saw a tweet that was like, why didn't any of these kids just lie about their favorite book? And Yeah, I don't know if this is a dying behavior, but in retrospect, I definitely think there were tons of people in my college classes, me included, who tried to appear smarter than they actually were. So conversely, I don't think listing Wuthering Heights as your favorite book means that much either without more context.
I love it when a smart kid's trying to be so stupid.
And even if Percy Jackson is the best book a student has read, I don't think that's like necessarily something we should ring alarm bells about either, because at least they're reading. In the article, Horwich notes in 1976, about 40% of high school seniors said they had read at least 6 books for fun in the previous year, compared with 11.5% who hadn't read any. And by 2022, these percentages had flipped. And yet, rather than focusing on the problem that many kids aren't reading books at all, we are moving to shame kids who are interested enough in literary humanities to be signing up for the class and who read books for fun, all because said books are not like high caliber enough. So I wanted to bring up this article in this video because it's the same kind of discourse applied to women who read genre fiction or women who read Colleen Hoover. I made this poorly received TikTok video a couple months ago where I said I didn't like Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, and it activated like a bunch of people into accusing me of only reading genre fiction and therefore not being able to understand the merits of literary fiction. Meanwhile, I do read both, and I'm sure there are people who read Colleen Hoover who also read Wuthering Heights. I also think that the take that an entire genre of books is glorifying abuse or that we shouldn't like or read a work of fiction because there's a toxic trope is reductive. I genuinely think that this is a symptom of a culture where reading is going downhill because people now lack the literary analysis skills to understand that there can be value in books that depict problematic themes. It reminds me of that TikTok where the guy is like giving a thumbs down every so often when I read Lolita in public, so people know I don't agree with it. I also think it's a symptom of a culture that is quite literally too online because it leads to many people nitpicking at random things that actually don't matter in the grand scheme of their life. Maybe the conversation would be different if it was revealed that a bunch of 12-year-olds were reading 50 Shades of Grey. But if it's an adult woman, I trust that she's okay. And fiction is also supposed to be reflective of humanity. And obviously the world is not always sunshine and rainbows. And so not every book should also be sunshine and rainbows. Of course, I think there are some writers who are irresponsible and who should be rightfully criticized for their work, but that doesn't mean their work should be completely censored either, because you can't really criticize someone's work unless you were able to read at least some of it. And I think that rather than putting the blame on books, we should instead start asking, how do we teach readers to think critically about the subject that they're reading about, which is really the heart of everyone's concern. Also, it's important to add that dark romance is just easy to pick on, but none of the tropes that are present in these works are completely new. Dark romance author Rena Kent compares the genre's tropes to the dark themes present in horror and fantasy novels like Game of Thrones, and argues that people are just too preoccupied with dark romance because it's a genre enjoyed primarily by women. And I do think she has a point. The stuff that is in Game of Thrones is honestly so horrifying. I found it kind of unwatchable because I like torture stuff like really just like distresses me. And some people have criticized both the book series and its adapted TV show for being like overly gratuitous, but for the most part the show and book series are universally showered with praise and awards. By the way, according to Wired, a little over half of Game of Thrones' viewer base are men. Coincidence? I think not. However, I don't think it's just men making fun of women's books anymore. Actually, most of the anti-dark romance takes I've seen have come from other women. It reminds me of this like very niche Substack discourse where writer Emily Sundberg wrote an essay talking about the changing nature of Substack posts, and in it she did throw some shade towards writers who shill out poorly written content for money. She didn't name any names, but most of what she described the poorly written content to be was the kind of content being monotonously pushed out by other women writers, like listicles, like diary style writing, etc. A lot of people agreed with her take, but there was also major pushback, mainly along the lines of let women write and women get so much flack already, leave us alone. The other counter argument came from people who didn't see any of this kind of content on their own feeds to begin with, and so they didn't feel this take was that relevant to their experience. There's historical reasons for why women are hard on each other, but I also think algorithms are playing such a big role. So I imagine that most of the people criticizing Colleen Hoover are also inundated with Colleen Hoover content on TikTok, prompting them to talk about it more, which only leads to more Colleen on the algo. I'm actually dying to know how many men get Colleen Hoover content on their TikTok feeds. I've also been seeing this in the fashion sphere, which is why I've felt less compelled to talk about fashion trends over the years. Because I think unless they can be solidified as a trend through the test of time, usually these microtrends only exist on TikTok and in New York City for about 2 months, and it's just not worth reporting about. But obviously, if you're on that side of TikTok or haunting downtown Manhattan, it seems like it's everywhere, it's ever present. Anyway, these are just some of the things that I've been thinking about. I'm always curious to know what you think of the dark romance genre, whether or not you've read any of it, and whether or not you think it actually has larger societal repercussions. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye. If you're not sure what to get, give the gift of choice with a ThredUp gift card.